Zheng Yang wasn't supposed to be in this situation. He was an electrical engineer, not some high-stakes adventurer, and certainly not someone who should have been anywhere near a high-voltage transformer on a warm Tuesday afternoon. His company had given him the task of checking the malfunctioning equipment at the edge of the city's industrial park, an old relic that had been long overdue for a complete overhaul. Of course, he didn't mind the quiet. The empty hum of the machinery was a comforting sound to him, a reminder of how well he understood the world of wires, currents, and circuits. But that afternoon, something was off. Zheng Yang adjusted his gloves, checking the readings on his monitor. His routine process was simple: power off the grid, conduct an analysis, and then repair. But as he approached the transformer, a peculiar crackling sound filled the air. It wasn't the usual hum of the equipment, it was sharper, more erratic, like static electricity clinging to the edges of his senses. He felt a prickling at the back of his neck, and for a moment, he hesitated. Was it a surge? Maybe a buildup of excess charge from the grid's failure. But nothing felt right. The air around him grew heavy. His eyes darted to the flashing red warning light, but it was already too late. The transformer, a massive piece of old iron and wire, exploded, not with the fiery, angry burst he expected, but with an eerie, buzzing shockwave of electricity that didn't just affect the equipment. It entered him. Zheng Yang's body jerked as the electricity surged through his limbs, the shock sharp and blinding. He should have collapsed, should have screamed in agony as his muscles spasmed, but something inside him resisted. Instead, his thoughts expanded, his consciousness stretching outwards like a wire that had suddenly been given too much voltage. He could feel every current of energy that existed in the room, the pulse of the nearby circuit breakers, the electrical hum of the fluorescent lights above his head. But it wasn't just the things around him. He could feel the thrum of his own body, the way his heart beat in sync with the electrical charge, the way his neurons fired and sparked in perfect rhythm. For a second, it was pure chaos. His mind was a swirl of energy, a vortex of raw power that seemed to defy every law of nature he had ever known. And then, just as suddenly, it all stopped. The storm of electricity halted as quickly as it had begun, leaving Zheng Yang standing in the middle of the room, breathless, untouched. But something inside him had changed. He staggered, gripping the edge of a workbench for support. His pulse, still erratic, seemed to buzz beneath his skin. His head swam with strange sensations. What had just happened? With his mind still dizzy from the shock, he pushed himself upright. He checked his arms, his chest, nothing visible, no burns or marks. But his eyes flickered toward the control panel on the wall, where the flashing lights had now gone silent. He hadn't touched anything, yet he could feel the current, his own hand, as though it had become an extension of the very electrical grid itself. He raised it slightly, almost absent-mindedly, and the lights flickered again. How was this possible? He stood still for a moment, his heart thudding as he tried to process what had just happened. His instincts screamed at him to call for help, to report the incident, but something else tugged at the back of his mind. A feeling, no, a knowing, that this was far beyond anything he had ever imagined. He held his hand up again, this time deliberately. The fluorescent lights above hummed to life, flickering as if they recognized his command. The computers around him buzzed in response, their fans kicking into gear as if the very machines had been woken from some long, dormant slumber. Zheng Yang could feel it all, the rhythm, the flow. He was controlling it. His body surged with energy, the power of the current flowing through his veins like liquid fire. The more he focused, the more he realized that he wasn't just feeling the electricity, he was commanding it. The hum of the lights, the whir of the machinery, it all responded to his will. He could manipulate it at will, like a puppeteer pulling on invisible strings. A grin tugged at the corner of his lips, a combination of shock and excitement. He couldn't explain what was happening, but at that moment, he didn't care. It didn't take long for the higher-ups at Echelon Power to notice. Zheng Yang was contacted by the company's regional office almost immediately after his accident. They were impressed, to say the least. Within days, a team of executives arrived at his workplace, whisking him away in a black SUV with tinted windows. He barely had time to process what was happening. He was no longer just an engineer, he was something more. At Echelon Power's headquarters, the world of energy he had once understood was thrown into sharp, uncomfortable clarity. The executives greeted him like royalty, and he was ushered into a vast conference room where sleek glass tables reflected the ambient light of high-tech monitors. The head of the company, a sharp-dressed man named Derek Leach, extended his hand with a smile. "Zheng Yang," he said smoothly, "you've just become the most important person in the world." Zheng Yang didn't respond right away. He felt out of place, overwhelmed by the sudden surge of attention. "I don't understand," he said slowly, trying to wrap his mind around what they were suggesting. "What do you mean?" Leach leaned back in his chair. "Your ability to manipulate electricity isn't just a freak accident. It's the future of energy. You've become the key to controlling the entire world's power grid. You can make electricity do whatever you want, whenever you want." Zheng Yang's mind raced. The words sounded almost too grand to be true. Power. Control. Energy, his very definition of the world had just shifted, expanded into something far more dangerous. But in that moment, it wasn't just fear that gripped him. It was a sense of possibility. I could reshape the world. As the days passed, Zheng Yang was given access to the most advanced technology Echelon had at its disposal. His newfound abilities were tested rigorously, and with each test, his power seemed to grow. He could control the lights in an entire city, disrupt satellites in space, and bend the flow of electricity as easily as a violinist plucks at strings. But it wasn't just about the technology. It was the people, too. The executives, the scientists, the politicians, they all saw him as their secret weapon, someone who could help Echelon consolidate global control over energy. The more they praised him, the more it seemed that they weren't simply awed by his abilities. They were using him, manipulating his potential to further their own goals. Zheng Yang couldn't ignore the discomfort creeping into the back of his mind. Was he truly a king in this new world, or just another pawn being placed on a corporate chessboard? As he grew more comfortable with his power, a question began to gnaw at him: who was really in control here, him, or the company that had taken him in? Zheng Yang stood in the center of the sleek, glass-walled conference room, his gaze shifting from the neatly dressed executives around the table to the high-tech monitors that lined the walls. Each screen displayed maps of the world, grids of energy pulses, and data streams that seemed to ripple like living creatures. They were all tied to him now: the flow of electricity, the beat of the global power systems. He could feel it. Every city, every factory, every light bulb that hummed at that very moment. "They're all under my control." Zheng Yang, Derek Leach's voice cut through the hum of his thoughts, bringing him back to the present. "You're not just the future of energy. You're the future of civilization itself. With your abilities, Echelon can control the world's power markets, bring entire nations to their knees, and steer the flow of the global economy." Zheng Yang blinked, focusing on the man's words, but he couldn't shake the sense that he was a tool, an instrument being wielded by someone else. These were the kinds of things people whispered about, the stuff of conspiracy theories and doomsday scenarios. Yet here he was, at the center of it all. Leach was watching him closely, gauging his reaction. "Imagine it," he continued, his voice smooth and persuasive. "A world where we, Echelon, control the power. No more blackouts. No more energy crises. And most importantly, no more unpredictability. We can end wars before they start, we can create energy-rich utopias, or crush the power of any nation that refuses to comply." Zheng Yang's mind raced as the implications sank in. He could end poverty, solve energy shortages, even cure entire industries of their inefficiencies. But it wasn't about solving problems. It was about control. And Leech, this polished, unflinching corporate figure, had no interest in making the world better. He wanted power. Zheng Yang's fists clenched involuntarily, his nails digging into his palms. He could feel the energy in his own body, thrumming just beneath his skin, like a constant pulse. It was intoxicating, yes, but also dangerous. He could control everything, from the smallest devices to entire cities. His every whim could change the course of events. But at what cost? A voice, distant but growing louder, echoed in his mind. Is this what you want? To be their puppet? To bend to their will for the sake of order? He turned to Leech, trying to steady his thoughts. What's the catch? He asked, his voice calm but sharp. Leech smiled, but there was something predatory behind the expression. There is no catch, Zheng Yang. You've seen what we can offer you. The future, in your hands. Just help us harness the full potential of your gift, and you'll have everything. Money, influence, power. We'll make sure you're untouchable. Zheng Yang had heard the promises before. The promises of a perfect world where everything aligned, where power and stability reigned supreme. He had read the books, seen the documentaries. But the reality was always much darker. Echelon was a machine, and machines didn't care about people. They only cared about control. A few weeks passed in a blur of tests, simulations, and demonstrations. Zheng Yang would stand in a room, his hands raised, and the lights would flicker or the machines would hum to life. It felt like a game, one that he was becoming more adept at playing. At first, he marveled at his abilities. He could bend the very essence of energy to his will, like an artist shaping clay. He could feel the power of the grid surge beneath his fingertips, guiding the flow of electricity wherever he wished. The world was at his command. But the more time he spent with Echelon, the more the whispers in his head grew louder. You're being used. One night, while working late in one of the corporate labs, Zheng Yang uncovered a strange file hidden deep within the company's servers. At first, it appeared to be an innocuous set of routine energy reports, but as he dug deeper, he uncovered something that made his stomach turn. It was a project, a highly classified project, that had been in the works long before his accident. The documents detailed plans for a massive, global mind control network. He scrolled through the pages, his pulse quickening. The files revealed how Echelon had been studying the human brain's electrical impulses for years, trying to find a way to harness them. They had already tested the concept on a smaller scale, manipulating neural signals to influence people's actions, to make them compliant. And now, with Zheng Yang's abilities, they intended to expand the project into something much larger. A network, linked by the flow of electricity, capable of controlling entire populations. Zheng Yang felt a cold shiver run through him. This wasn't about energy. This was about control, complete control over the human mind. He wasn't just a tool for their corporate empire. He was their weapon. And they were going to use him to turn the world into a compliant, docile entity under their reign. His heart raced, and for the first time since the accident, he felt a flicker of fear. The power he had was no longer something to be admired, it was something to be feared. Echelon had always seen him as a means to an end, but now it was clear that he was nothing more than a cog in their machine, a cog they could use to reshape humanity. Zheng Yang's mind churned as he pondered his next move. He could feel the currents of power flowing through him. He was the living conduit of the world's energy. But that same power could also be his undoing. He wasn't just controlling the grids and the lights anymore. He was controlling lives. He was controlling minds. The very thing that made him so powerful was the thing that made him a pawn. His phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen to see a message from Leech. We need you in the boardroom. Now. With a grim sense of resolve, Zheng Yang stood from his seat and walked toward the elevator. He had to make a choice. There was no turning back now. Either he would submit to Echelon's vision of the world, or he would fight against it, risking everything. But deep down, he knew that to destroy the company and its plans, he would have to do something unimaginable. He would have to destroy himself, or at least, the part of him that had once believed in saving the world. The elevator doors closed behind him, and as it descended, Zheng Yang's mind flashed with images of everything he had seen, everything he had learned. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had once been a man of reason, of logic. But now, he was something else, a man who controlled the very essence of life and death. The hum of the elevator, the faint flicker of the lights, the constant pulse of the power grids, it all seemed so insignificant in that moment. When the doors opened to the boardroom, he stepped out into the cold light of the corporate empire he had come to know. But this time, he wasn't the man they thought he was. He wasn't their pawn anymore. Zheng Yang stepped into the boardroom, his mind a swirl of conflicting emotions. The air felt thick with anticipation, the heavy weight of the decisions he was about to make pressing down on him like a vice. As the door slid shut behind him, he was met with the cold, calculating eyes of Derek Leach and the other executives. Their faces were impassive, their expressions masked, as if they had been expecting him. Leach didn't even rise from his chair. He only gestured for Zheng Yang to take the seat at the far end of the table. The room was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant hum of the city's electrical grid, the same hum Zheng Yang had become so attuned to in the past weeks. It was like the world was speaking to him, urging him to act. Zheng Yang, Leach said after a long pause, his voice smooth and controlled, "You've seen the files. You know what we're building here. A new world order, one powered by Echelon and you. The possibilities are endless. You've got the power to ensure stability, prosperity, and peace. No more wars. No more poverty. We can eliminate the need for politicians, governments, all of it. With your abilities, we can create a utopia." Zheng Yang's heart pounded as Leach's words sunk in. A utopia. Wasn't that the dream of every power-hungry corporate mogul? The promise of a world where they were the rulers, where everything was perfectly in their control. But at what cost? The realization that the power to control the world had been given to him, that his ability to manipulate electricity was not just a gift, but a weapon, was a cold, bitter pill to swallow. Leach, sensing his hesitation, continued, "What we're asking for, Zheng Yang, is simple. All we need is for you to embrace your potential. We're not asking you to be a dictator. Think of it as guidance. You will be the linchpin, the cornerstone of this new era. You'll control energy, you'll control lives, and you'll ensure that the world runs the way it was always meant to. No more uncertainty. No more suffering. You will have everything you've ever wanted." Zheng Yang's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The words were soothing, but underneath, he could feel the venom. He could sense the control Leach wanted to exert over him. The subtle manipulation. This was not about creating a better world, it was about consolidating power. It was about making Zheng Yang the face of their empire while they pulled the strings from behind the scenes. That he thought of the files he had found, the neural manipulation, the mind control. A system that linked human brains to the electrical grid, rendering free will obsolete. He wasn't just a cog in a machine. He was the machine. The thing they had been building for years, the thing that would give them ultimate dominion over humanity, was already in motion. And it had all led to him. "Do you understand what you're asking me to do?" Zheng Yang's voice came out steady, but there was a sharp edge to it. "You want me to control the world. You want me to force people to live under your rules, to bend them to your will. You want me to play God." Leach's lips curved into a slight smile. "Not play God. Be God. The world needs a leader like you, Zheng Yang. You have the power to make sure no one suffers again. Don't you want to use that power to fix the problems of the world?" Zheng Yang's mind raced. He could feel the weight of his abilities. He could feel the power flowing through his veins, the potential to change the world at the tip of his fingers. He could make it all work. He could fix the energy crisis. He could end poverty. He could control the economies of entire nations, force peace between warring factions, end hunger with a flick of his wrist. The possibilities were endless. But so were the consequences. But at what price? He looked around the room at the other executives, all of them seated around the table, watching him like vultures waiting for a kill. They weren't interested in a better world. They were interested in control, in consolidating their wealth and power. They were the parasites, and he was the host. "What's in it for me?" he asked, his voice cold. "You promise me power, wealth, security. But I know how this works. You're not giving me anything. You want to use me as your tool. The moment I become useless to you, you'll discard me, just like every other pawn." Leech's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "We're not here to discard you, Zheng Yang. We've already given you everything you need. All the resources, all the technology. And the power to control the future of the human race. Isn't that what you've always wanted? The chance to make a difference?" Zheng Yang didn't answer immediately. He could feel the electricity in his body thrumming, calling to him. He could feel the current, the pulse of the world's energy, and it was so easy to fall into it, to let it guide him. To take control. To force the world into submission. He could end all suffering. He could make everything right. But the image of a world where humanity's free will was erased, where his every decision would become law, made his stomach twist. He wasn't the savior they were portraying him as. He was just another tool in their hands, a puppet who could string the world along until they pulled the final thread and left it in ruins. "You think you can control the world," Zheng Yang said slowly, his voice low and dangerous, "but you're wrong. No one controls the world. No one can. Not you. Not me." Leech's eyes narrowed, his smile fading entirely. "Don't make a mistake, Zheng Yang. You're in this with us now. There's no turning back. You've already tasted the power. You know what you can do. You're not just a man anymore. You're a force." Zheng Yang's breath quickened as the room seemed to pulse with the weight of their words. He could feel it, the pull of the energy, the force that had taken hold of him. He could make them bend. He could take the power for himself and turn the tables. But in that moment, he realized something more important, that he wasn't just the man with the power. He was the man who had the potential to destroy everything. The energy in the room shifted, like a storm was approaching. Zheng Yang closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the hum of the power that coursed through his veins. He could feel the pull, the overwhelming desire to seize control, to crush them all beneath his will. But he also felt the growing ache in his chest, the ache of knowing what that would cost. "Maybe you're right," Zheng Yang said quietly, opening his eyes to meet Leech's gaze. "Maybe I am a force. But I'm not your force." Before anyone could react, he raised his hand, and the room seemed to tremble with the sheer weight of the electrical charge he unleashed. The lights flickered, dimmed, and then went out entirely, plunging the room into darkness. Zheng Yang took a deep breath. The pulse of energy still thrummed beneath his skin, but now, it was different. He wasn't just reacting. He was in control. That he wasn't a puppet. He was the master of his own fate. "And the fate of the world, for that matter. You're going to stop this," he said, his voice calm but firm, "or I will."